go. And breathlessly brings me to introduce my two guests. And thank you both for being here. I'll start with David Cameron, real David Cameron, RDC. There was another David Cameron, but we've all forgotten him these days. David has been an independent thinking associate for quite a few years now, and independent thinking is all the richer because of it. He challenges, he questions, he pushes, he gets us to think, me especially, to think about things in different ways. Just when I think I know what I'm doing, an email will pop up and I have to rethink it because of David's mind and his intent and his passion for doing the right thing by young people, especially young people from poorer socioeconomic backgrounds, or however we want to label it. We'll perhaps discuss labels later. So I'm really pleased that David has given up some time from his Erie up in Scotland to share his expertise and knowledge. And it's thanks to David that Chris Kilkenny has entered our radar. And I'll start with Chris. Chris, he came and we have this thing called Independent Thinking Saturdays, where some of the associates will gather around and we'll just have a guest in and we'll just discuss things. Chris came along and just blew us out of the water with his humility, with his strength, with his story, with his ability to survive, with his ability to keep going, and with his passion for trying to take from his experiences in order to help others not go through similar sorts of experiences. So if we open up Chris's microphone, thank you both for joining us. There we go. We'll see what we could do. Hi, Chris. I want to go straight in. I want to just start a little bit with your story, for those who don't know your story, if that's okay. We'll talk about that. The question came in from Emma, and it's two parts, really. She says, what experiences have helped you develop your self-belief, improve your confidence, starting from when you were a child? So how has your experiences, you can talk us through them briefly, helped you become the young man you become now?
Oh, sorry. It's quite a broad question, but I suppose that, I mean, a lot of the experiences I've went through since I was a child, becoming to where I am today, have called for almost a necessity to be slightly confident. Otherwise, it's almost have some sort of confidence or don't survive. Ask for stuff or don't get it. Put yourself in a situation where you're saying yes to something or don't get an opportunity. If I kind of just went the sort of route where I was quiet and never developed any sort of confidence or self-belief whilst working with other people or taking opportunities, I probably would have not been in the position to be able to speak to you today or to do go through many of the challenges that I have done over the past few months even. I probably would have found it really hard to survive this period of time if I hadn't survived so many things in the past.
So it's confidence as a survival technique.
I think that my survival instinct as a young person had a large amount to play in my confidence today. Sort of growing up, the resilience I had to show going through different situations in life sort of puts that extra edge onto my personality now that's kept me going. Some of these things, some of the stuff I've went through has been pretty terrible and pretty rubbish, but I suppose the silver lining that you can look at is from having gone through that and having been through some certain stuff, it's given me a sort of experience of life that some people don't usually have. Some learning that I've taken from that some people don't usually get. Spoken to people that some people don't usually get to speak to, being a part of different stages of development that other people don't usually get the opportunity to be a part of.
Can you, I was just had Lisa saying to me, thank you for separating Scotland and England, which is something that people have been trying to do for a long time, separating Scotland and England, but in the first 5 minutes, so that's good. There's a pat on the back for that. Can you just paint a snapshot, Chris, of what childhood was like for you, so people who don't know your story?
Yeah.
Of those.
I suppose, like, starting off growing up, but from the time I sort of went to school, even before school, I sort of started off, lived with my mum, my two little brothers, my sister. My mum was addicted to drugs. She suffered from substance abuse for a long time. We moved. She never had any real support network when we were really young. She stayed in Aberdeen, which was away from Edinburgh, which is where the most of my mum's support network would have been. She wasn't in touch with her mum. She never really had anybody. She had 4 young kids. She suffered from domestic abuse, substance misuse. We moved from city to city. We ended up back in Edinburgh, and very quickly, things just sort of got into a rut there. My mum couldn't really get any help. Back when I was younger, I never really noticed anything wrong with my life because it was all the only life I'd ever known. So it's very hard for somebody who's living like that, if they've never seen what a normal family home looks like. I very much, when I was younger, just assumed that that's what normal family home looked like. Coming home at night and your mum wasn't there, or having to look for her in different sort of houses and stuff like that. I just assumed that was what life was like when I was a young person. But as I started to grow up a wee bit more, and I started to realise that it wasn't so normal. Eventually, me and my little brothers and sister were split up, and we got moved into care placements around the city, around the country. My two little brothers in one, my sister in another. I spent a large chunk of time in a young person centre, which is basically just a place that looks after young people if there's no foster placements available. So very much like your traditional, what you would imagine an orphanage looking like. But so I spent a lot of time there. My time through education was pretty rough. I never really took to adults very well as I grew up, because I felt like everybody used to make decisions about me, but nobody ever used to ask me what I thought about those decisions or what I thought would be good for my life. And I very quickly ended up sort of kicked out of 3 schools and doing my exams in a local community centre. I was very capable of doing my exams at the time. I was capable of getting through school. I mean, I was smart, I was bright as a young person, but it was the belonging that I never felt like I belonged anywhere. I mean, I never had that sense of belonging when I was at school. I never had that sense of care when I was at school. I didn't think anybody really was bothered. So I just kind of gave that same attitude back the way when I was growing up. And it wasn't until after school and sort of into my adult life that I realised actually what could have been done different for me, what could have helped me, because I've seen a lot of people my age, especially at 16, 17, who were just as smart as me, or I was just as smart as them, who were doing a lot better and who were in far better positions in their life. And it wasn't until after school that I had the opportunity to reflect on it and decide, well, or ask myself, what could have been better? How could it have been better for me? Who could have done what better? And it was kind of that drive that asked me to come, that sort of led me into doing what I do now, and asking those questions and answering those questions as best as I can to educators and other people, and talking people through my story and seeing if it maybe triggers anything for them and triggers any young people that they work with. When I'm speaking to teachers or when I'm in schools, usually when I'm telling my story, a lot of people can identify the young people that I'm talking about. When I'm talking about myself, they can see young people that they could link to my story, things that I talk about in quite stark truth, that in a quite stark, truthful way that people don't usually hear. When I talk about my emotions when I was young, when I talk about feeling left out, when I talk about the reasons that I've done certain things, so it became kind of unique. So I suppose that's kind of how we ended up here, was being able to sort of talk about it and in a way that other young people and other adults haven't always found a way to do yet.
Yeah, it's interesting that language. So you wanted them to talk to you, but they didn't listen to you. But now you've got a voice and you found a voice, and it's given you, and then confidence breeds confidence. I thought I'd bring David in because I've never seen David not speak for 10 minutes before. So I'm sure he's been in the chat room having their chat already. What did you see when because you introduced us to Chris? What did you see in Chris, and how common is Chris's story? And maybe we'll just mute Chris this well, yeah, there we go. How common is Chris's story? How many Chris's are there out there?
Yeah, I think Chris's story is really common, and there's so much that I love. I've just posted in the chat room that Chris's idea of normality is not only the fact that he only lived that life and therefore that was normal, but clearly he wasn't seeing anything else around him that challenged that. So the young people around Chris and the communities that he was in were experiencing exactly the same kind of reality. And I think Chris's story is very common. Chris's emergence from it, I guess, is the part that's not common. He built that confidence, and he's been, I think, an extremely clever person in terms of the links that he's formed. He's very quick to identify opportunities. He's got real clarity when a chance arises, and he's always ready to take it. He's always ready to push himself out. And as he says, there's lots of people who don't have that confidence. he has had some really good chances. Some of the work that he did with the film group, lots of the creative work that he had the opportunity to do, I think made a difference for him. But that's the exception. The background that he's got is very much the rule for lots of people in lots of communities.
Okay, we'll come back to unpicking why some thrive, survive, and go on to thrive, and why others don't. We'll come back, but I just want to come back to Chris. You mentioned film, and Chris, if we can just open up Chris's microphone again. One of the first things that I heard you talk about was the trainers film and the situation at school. And I just wonder whether you can just share that, because I'm aware of the conversation we've tied in with this as well, that sometimes with all the best will in the world, we want to help, but we end up doing things to children or doing things for children as opposed to doing things with children, which is a Mark Finnis model. And that you were in a situation where the teacher was trying to do the right thing, but it was completely the wrong thing. Just want to sort of share that, what you learned from that at the time.
Yeah, so, I mean, so for anybody that's not seen it, The Wrong Trainers was a documentary that was made, a small animation, partly filmed documentary that was made around about child poverty at the time. The BBC were making these little six little documentaries based on 6 different families around the UK, talking about child poverty. So there was one about overcrowding in housing. There was one about, then there was one about drugs misuse, which was obviously covered my family. And at the time, I was living in a rehabilitation centre in Edinburgh. And the BBC just came out and they listened to my family story. I thought I talked a wee bit about my life. They listened to the story. They decided they wanted to make this little animation about it. And they came out and asked them various different questions. And it was quite different because at the time, nobody was really talking about this sort of stuff. I'd certainly never heard anybody talking about it or seen anything on the sort of mainstream TV that showed really what was happening and what was going on. And they basically I was living in this rehabilitation centre at the time. There was loads of different rooms, and it was a different sort of environment that you would usually imagine young people living in. And it was a really good thing. It was actually a good thing to be a part of at the time, apart from the Great Fear of Flying, which David knows much about, that I gained from that trip. But I suppose get stuck here. I suppose what I learned, like going through that, they showed it in schools at the time. They made it really anonymous so that people my age wouldn't have sort of seen or identified me as being the person that was in it, or watched it at the time that they would have been watching TV. And that went really well. And about a year later, it was I came in from school one day and they were showing it in my classroom. And although this was a really good thing to be a part of, I really didn't want people to know that it was me and that's what my life was, and that my mum was a drug addict and I'd been living in a rehabilitation centre and stuff like that. And they showed this documentary in a class that I was in first period after lunch one day. And I remember begging the teacher not to show it when I first seen the DVD at the start of the class, and the teacher not believing it was about me, because it was more plausible that I was just a class clown than somebody that might be telling the truth, and that somebody in his classroom might be suffering from some hardship that was just shown in this DVD. It was more plausible that, I was just joking. I was just being a bit of a madman, as I commonly would be. I suppose looking back, it really, I don't know why I would have thought I would be lying about that, but I was a bit of a class clown. I was taking the piss in class, and I was sort of that guy that I would be standing up and making a bit of a mug of myself, because that was the sort of attention that I was used to being able to control. But this time I wasn't lying. Oh. Everybody there?
Yeah.
I just my screen went black. This time I wasn't lying, and he went ahead and showed it in the classroom, and it showed, in-depth detail of what my life was like, how I was living at home, and then I got taken away with my sister and living in this rehabilitation centre. My little brothers were in care, and my mum was addicted to heroin. And it showed in depth what it was like to be coming off of heroin, and whilst me and my mum were living in it, and this was all shown in the classroom, and people were sort of sitting in the classroom watching this, saying, "Oh, is that Chris's little brothers? Is that Chris's little sister?" People were sort of making comments in the classroom, pretty nasty comments. It led to a vast amount of bullying. It led to that was part of my decision to be getting involved in different things in school. It was a large part of what led to me being kicked out of 3 schools and not finishing my exams or anything like that. And looking back, what did I learn about this? it's always one of the big things now that I talk about, is because for that teacher, it wasn't a case of just purely not believing me. I think it was a case of not believing what was actually on that teacher's doorstep. That teacher was teaching in a school on a doorstep with communities full of deprivation, but it wasn't so clear to him that this is how bad it could really be. And I think that when I talk just now, I think a large part of what I do is try and make people realise that this is happening on your doorstep, and you will have young people coming in your classroom that will be experiencing life like this, even if they're wearing the same uniform as the guy sitting next to them, even if they might look all right, even if they might sound all right, even if they're doing all right in class. What they might be going back to is completely different to what you might be imagining for them, and what they might come into in the morning, after what they might have been experiencing in the morning before they see you at the first class of the day, before you start shouting at them for not having a pencil or not having the right uniform or not behaving, is completely different to what you might imagine them having come from.
Yeah, it's such a powerful story, and this idea that the teacher tried to do the right thing and in doing so totally torpedoed your academic career and your life and all sorts of things. But just come, David, what you've worked in so many areas within education, both in schools but then across children's services as well, and worked with so many other people. What examples are there of where organisations get it right? Because we hear so often of them getting it wrong, and then this gap's not going away and it's getting worse, and let alone what's going on at the moment. What good stories are there out there, David?
Well, I think there are a huge number of good stories, and for me, one of the problems is that we spend too much time reacting systemically. So often what we do is we get a problem around equality, inequality, or whatever. We look for a systemic solution. And when we do that, everything has to change for everybody. The reality is that had Chris had a different set of teachers in a different school possibly, or even different teachers in the same school, the experience that you had with that video would never have happened. And the issue that we've got, I think, consistently is inconsistency. That we've got excellent practitioners, we've got some really, really good people out there who understand, who are genuinely concerned, who are passionate, and sometimes they're restrained by an overcrowded curriculum, by diktats which are narrow. There's a number of issues we can talk about around the whole idea of pace and levelling and all of that. But I think the system often works against people. But I go into schools where I see young people like Chris thriving. Sometimes these are mainstream schools. There are some brilliant examples on Twitter, and you know yourself, Ian, just from the conversations this week, that if you were in the school that Jonathan Lear's in, you would have real confidence as a child that you were going to get that chance to learn, you were going to get that chance to find self-respect. You would know if you'd worked within the kind of curriculum that Deborah Kidd and Hal Roberts talked about this week. What Deborah talks about is a curriculum for hope. You would have had the chances that Chris didn't get. So there are lots and lots and lots of examples around that. And I think what we need to look at much more is this whole idea of how do we do this levelling up, and how do we release people so that more people can do what these excellent schools are doing. How can we remove these barriers?
A lot of teachers I meet say, oh, it's all very well telling us this, go and tell them, go and tell. Sometimes it's the leadership of the school or the MAT in the UK, in England, the school group, or sometimes they're actually what they're referring to is the government, the Department for Education, whichever country that you're in. Is there a sense that, do you sense a sense of powerlessness in teachers that I'd like to do it differently, but they're making us do it? Or do you think teachers can make those differences without having to worry about those on high?
I think they can. I mean, I think the position's very mixed. And, you know, I talk constantly about things like Pedagogue, you know, a website established by teachers for teachers, which has lasted remarkably well. I see teachers who deliver their curriculum constantly and consistently. despite the barriers that are in front of them. But we need to move to the situation, you're absolutely right, Ian. We need to move to a situation where people aren't doing things despite, they're doing things because. And that's the level at which we need systemic change. I think the difficulty that we make is that too many of the changes that we make in the system are additions rather than subtractions. And I think that's where some of the need for change is, that people need more permissions, they need more encouragement. And ultimately, if I may, one of the key things is that we need to make sure that we assess those things that we talk about as having value. Because for me, what I've seen over the years is that we talk about, in Scotland, for example, we had Curriculum for Excellence, and we had these 4 kind of key pillars, if you like, a Curriculum for Excellence, successful learners, you know, and 3 others. But it was really only successful learners that were being assessed when it came to those assessments which had genuine currency. And we need to move away from that.
Yeah, okay. Social mobility. We wrote the book, Independent Thinking, sort of a big collaborative book called The Working Class a couple of years ago, trying to change the narrative around the poor kids, the feckless poor, it's their own fault, it's you know, the level playing field, all the sorts of messages that we were getting that could be quite easily disputed. And one of the chapter you wrote would just open my eyes to this idea of social mobility, because there are certain words that are used, or certain phrases that are used, that you end up just not arguing with. No child left behind, or what was the one recently? The freedom of movement was the name of the bill that did the complete opposite of what it says. So the language is you have to be very careful with the language. And social mobility, you just assume, yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, people can, you know, have choices about where they live. And then you, again, as I said in the introduction, you just, when you think your thinking's right, you come from the broadside and go, well, actually, and then you think, well, hang on a minute, social mobility is saying basically where you grew up is rubbish. So the best thing you can do is get enough qualifications to leave there and go and live somewhere middle class. So just explain social mobility. And then I want to come back to Chris, because I want people to know that Chris isn't a fairy story. He's not sitting on the steps of his mansion.
No, not his father's second home or whatever. Yeah,
well, that as well. So then I want to come back to Chris and just find a little bit more about his life now. And also there's a question, Chris, that's come through, which is for your own son now, how do things compare when now he's at school for when you were at school? But do social mobility for me, David, first, please.
Yeah, I mean, if you think I did anything worthwhile around social mobility, try reading Hilary Mantel. The whole story, particularly of the new book, Mirror and the Light, is just a wonderful story about social mobility, where Thomas Cromwell essentially comes from a kind of background similar to Chris's in lots of ways. So Cromwell comes out of that. He, like Chris, finds a way to get into the world. He finds a way to take on the mantle of the class that he seeks to join. And without issuing any spoilers around it, it doesn't end well. It doesn't end well because he's not fully accepted. And there's a lot of that discussion around social mobility, which is intrinsically flawed. We talk about upward mobility. We talk about downward mobility. We talk about social mobility in terms of a hierarchical structure, which is never challenged. And social mobility is the measure of how far you climb up that hierarchy, regardless of the fact that it was that hierarchy which oppressed you in the first place and created the need for you to seek further opportunities. And social mobility is a convenient way of avoiding the whole debate around equity and equality. Because that's fine, you know, we can point to stories, and the fact that you are going to go back to Chris around this whole idea of illustrating that it's not been a fairy story for him and he still faces challenges. That's hugely powerful, because what we do a lot of the time is we revel in the fairy stories. Everything's okay because the exceptions are the rules. And they're not. The exceptions defy the rules. For every young person who becomes Jazz Ampofar, whom you were also had on this week. And Jazz Ampofar, absolutely astonishing, amazing person. And Jazz wouldn't mind me saying, she probably said it in the programme, still seeks support, is so fortunate in the relationships that she has around her. Her husband's just an astonishing guy, looks like Idris Elba, and, you know, acts like Mother Teresa, fabulous person. But, you know, so many people don't become Jazz because they are broken. They are broken by the intensity of the experience which they have to endure. And yet we spend so much time celebrating these successes, and the Tories are brilliant at that. You know, the Conservatives are brilliant at that, trotting out the exceptions. And again, it's interesting. And my next comment's not critical of Michaela as a school, but it's that sudden rush to celebrate Michaela before they even had a full cohort across the school. It's that rush to seize on the exception. It's that rush to celebrate anything which appears to underline the validity of the hierarchy that's already established. And social mobility in these terms becomes a distraction. It becomes an excuse for not having progressive taxation. It becomes an excuse for not having a health service. It becomes an excuse for getting into the circumstances that we have seen exposed through coronavirus.
There's a phrase I heard recently: you can't pull yourself up by the bootstraps if you don't have any boots.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. I'll come to Chris, and then we'll come back to you. Now we've nailed social mobility. We'll get you to nail cultural capital in just a little while. That's another phrase that's being bandied about. But there is a question from Laura saying, "Do we need a new phrase in social mobility? Is there you're good with your words? Is there a phrase beyond social mobility that you think we should be trying to bring into the language, David?"
Yeah. I mean, I think what we need to be bringing into the language is a curriculum for equity. You know, again, it's a phrase that's been bandied around by a couple of people in Scotland, and I think what we need to do is we need to talk in terms of social change rather than social mobility. And, you know, it ill behoves me to lapse into classic Marxist dialogue, but, you know, the Marxist theory that you rise with your class and not beyond it, I think has a certain genuine validity.
Mm. Okay, thank you. Chris, let's open your mic up again. So how's life for you now?
Well, it's okay till it's not okay. Well, I mean, it's been a tough few years. It's been a tough couple of years, especially the last. I say that every time somebody asks me that, which is pretty much every year. I feel like I've been saying that since I was young. But it's been a tough couple of years. I've spent a lot of time in temporary accommodation as homeless, as many people who have heard me will know. I just moved into my first permanent place about 10 days before lockdown, just after I got coronavirus, which was a great added bit of luck. Like you were saying, I mean, my life's no fairy story, and as much as I might be able to talk and I might be able to come and do certain things that other people might not find themselves as confident to do. I mean, my life has very much been one big roller coaster, which I've taken David on the ride for a wee bit for a few years as well. I mean, so even I think that anybody that knows me will know that my life is by no means a fairy story, and I've had a young son who's now 6. He's getting older and older as days go on. Challenges for him as well now, and challenges for me as a parent, because he's got different issues that I'm needing to support just now as a parent, and so that's been tough over the past few years, especially as I've been dealing with issues of myself that have cropped up as the years have went along. And so I'm one of these people that can turn up one day and look the part and be great, but behind the scenes stuff can be really pretty rubbish. And I think that's what we do need to remember, because we do celebrate these successful stories sometimes like they are the be all and end all, but until they're dead, they're not. If they've got life ahead of them, then they've got challenges ahead of them. And that's very much the story for me. I'll have challenges for the rest of this week that I can, and there's only a couple of days left. But at the same time, life is a lot better than it was when I was a kid, and it's a lot better for my little boy as well. And the question that somebody was asking, what is life like for my little boy now at school? I mean, it's a lot better than what it was for me, because although there's challenges that every child might experience when they go to school and they start their journey in education, the difference between my journey and his journey is that people are a lot more aware, and people are willing to listen, and I'm not afraid of going into school. Whereas my parents were. I mean, my mum was afraid of going to school. I mean, you've never seen my mum in a school at a parents' evening or interacting with the teachers, and I still have that fear sometimes as well. I still get, even though I spend a lot of time I've spent a lot of time in schools over the last few years, I still have that absolute fear when I have to go down to the school and talk about my own son, or talk about myself, or ask for support, because I don't know. It's just that I think that it's. It doesn't matter whether you've had a bad experience yourself or not. I think that it can be a frightening place when you're going to talk about your own child and you're not in full control of what's going on, because you're handing that control over to someone else, and you have to put your trust in them, and you have to feel that they trust you. And sometimes that's not always the case, which is what gives me that fear sometimes when I go in and I have that feeling like, well, maybe the school doesn't trust me with my own son, because they're telling me what he needs more than I am. And you have to be willing to be able to accept that you don't always know best. And I think that's been a big sort of challenge for me, because I've sort of felt like over the last few years doing this sort of thing that I knew best what was right for me, and that might be the case. I might have knew what was best for me, but I don't always know what's best for my own son. And being able to have that clarity and being able to trust teachers now as an adult, when I never had any trust for them as a young person, has been a wee bit of a challenge. But I do have that trust, and Cameron is getting great support at school, and he's been itching at me every single day. When are we going back to school? When can I go back to school? When can I do this? When can I do that? Do you know what I mean? So, and that just shows to me, do you know what I mean, how much he loves it and how much he gets from it and how much he wants to be there. And I mean, that makes me really proud. That there's one of the things as an adult that I'm most proud of, not the talking or the travelling or the anything positive that I've been able to do, but being able to look at my own son and see that his life is far better than mine, and that it will continue to be forever. Do you know what I mean? Because I'll be there, and the people who care for him in schools will be there. And although we don't have a big, massive family, do you know what I mean, I've got lots of friends who are always there helping out. And do you know what I mean, that's how life is different, and it's sort of better for him, and it will always be. And no matter how rubbish my life can get, no matter how not much of a fairy tale my life is, my legacy isn't my own life. I feel like my legacy is his, and his life is a fairy tale, I believe.
It's a huge testament to you, Chris, and also it's the challenge. The voices out there that saying, "Oh, well, you know, you can't break the cycle." Single parent families, you know, the message at the moment is that it's the children from the poorer backgrounds and the single parent families. They're the ones who will be running wild because they haven't been at school. They're the ones who are getting no support. We need to open the schools to save those children from their own background. And you're just an example of that. Well, that isn't the case. We are desperate to go back to school, but because of you.
It's interesting, Ian, for me, two things. The Children's Parliament in Scotland have been doing a really good piece of work surveying young people during the lockdown. And although there are challenges and although there are issues being raised, lots of these young people who are often in quite difficult circumstances are actually doing well. And the survey is remarkably positive. And I was quoting in a blog I wrote recently the experience of my local Home Start. And they were getting really encouraging responses from families in incredibly difficult circumstances, small flats, no gardens, who were doing really good work with their children. And in fact, they were picking up, and one of the workers had done a wee video which she'd posted on YouTube. And it was brilliant. She was a mum in Home Start who was supported as well. She was then a volunteer. She now works for them. And she's on there saying, well, I didn't have any glue, but you can do this with sellotape. And loads of the mums, loads of the parents involved were picking up on that. Now, I'm not arguing for a minute that that's the universality of people's experiences, but there are some really good examples out there, I think, of working class parents, parents living in poverty, who are showing yet again that they love their children and they will try and do their best for them. And there's a quote come up about trust being a massive factor in parenting and education. And there's not enough trust in that dialogue about these parents. Owen Jones' point in Chavs that the working class is the one group that you can be absolutely abhorrently rude about without it being a criminal offence, I think is a really valid one.
Mm-hmm. The word trust has come up in so many of the conversations over the course of this week. Trusting for the government to trust the school leaders, for the school leaders to trust the staff, and for all of us to trust children a whole lot more and have conversations with them. It's a big word. I want to come back to Chris. So I'll open your mic in just a minute, Chris. Something I read recently, and it reminded me when you're describing your life now and your life, how it was as a child. There's a lot of people talking about cognitive load theory. I mentioned that there at the beginning. And in the classroom, if you're going to do the technical nature of teaching, right, you need to understand cognitive load and dual processing and all of that sort of stuff. But there's research about cognitive load and poverty. And for many children, the amount of stuff going on in their brains before they even arrive at school is absolutely huge. So Chris, if we open up your mic, when you were turning up at school, what state was your brain in to be able to, and you said you learned quite well, so were you able to sort of leave it all at the school gate, or did you carry it in with you? How was
I think when I was younger, definitely when I was younger, I'd be turning up with a lot of things. What was on my plate as I grew up grew. So if you imagine when I was really young, I never knew that my life wasn't so normal. So I basically accepted everything that was happening in my life as just being normal. So my plate was sort of empty. So when I was younger, my learning was, I was able to take part in classes and I enjoyed school and my learning was really good. And the more I sort of went up that scale in school, the more stuff sort of seemed to end up on my plate, because the more aware I was, what was going on around me, the more that I knew that what was happening at home wasn't normal. So I'd be coming into school and I'd be looking after my two little brothers and my sister, for example. Do you know what I mean? As we sort of went on a little bit to the later stages of primary school and the early stages of secondary school, I was looking after my two little brothers and my little sister, who were only a few years younger than me. My sister was a year younger than me. My two little brothers were 3 years younger than me. And I was looking after them, getting their washing done as best as I could, even though I never knew how to use washing machines and stuff like that, basic sort of skills. But I was trying to feed them as much as I could, trying to find my mum when we came back from school, wondering if she'd be in after school, and all this sort of stuff would be going on in my head before I even got into the first classroom in the morning. And sometimes I get in the morning and the first interaction I'd have with a teacher would be negative. And you can imagine for the rest of that day, I wasn't able to sort of intake anything else, because I would just go right into that zone of, well, they didn't want me here, so I'll not be here. And although I would physically be there, and when you're talking about learning, I was in no mental state to be taking sort of any knowledge from anybody else, even if I wanted to. So I would sort of sometimes line myself up, and I talk about this as well. I would go into schools and in my classroom, and I would sit down because I really did want to learn. Even doesn't matter how pissed off I was, I would always go into classrooms thinking I really want to take something for this class, I want to learn. And I would sit down and I would sit at my table and I'd line everything up in a straight line, my pencil, my ruler, my book, my jotter, everything, because I would associated straight lines and associated being sort of rigid with learning. So I'd go in and I'd focus and I'd stare at the teacher, with this real intensity for sort of 5 minutes until it sort of wore off. And because I wasn't in the zone to be learning, I would be fidgeting, drawing, doing something that would be annoy the teacher, and pretty much right away you'd get, Chris, if you're not, I've got 45 minutes to teach 30 pupils. If you're not going to take part, then take yourself and sit outside. And I would choose that because it was easier than trying all the time to learn and trying to force myself to do it. Instead of having this argument with the teacher that would be never ending, I would just go and sit outside in the classroom. I'd do what they said. And I spent a lot of time just sitting in the corridor with blank sheets of paper, learning absolutely nothing apart from fizzing over what was in my own head, what load I had brought in that was on my plate. And as I say, as I grew up and I was more aware of what was happening around me, and I was more aware of what was happening around me wasn't normal, the plate would fill up. So the more often these days would happen than not, the latter in stages I got of school.
the plate analogy is amusing. That your plate might grow at a certain, as you get older, your plate might grow, but on it is growing pace of your plate. And I like the fact that you're still sitting outside in the corridor, still not allowed in the house.
Yeah. I'm currently hiding in the corridor from my son, yeah.
From your son. I want to talk about a very strong word that came through loud and clear in so many of the people who wrote for the Working Class book. And there's a whole area of research in it. And I want to sort of segue from that into cultural capital. But the word shame, it was interesting how you didn't want people in your class to see that video because you didn't want them to see what your life was like, not out of shyness, I don't think. And I just want to know to what extent shame was part of your early years, how you feel about that now, and how in a classroom situation we can combat feelings of shame, because it's a huge area.
I think that, like, earlier on in the early stages of my life in school and education, I mean, shame never really came into it much because I never knew what I was experiencing was different from everybody else. It wasn't until as I was growing up and realised that people had different lives and people had clean clothes and haircuts when they came into the start of school. Very basic stuff. That was the first thing I started to notice. Those sort of very simple things. I mean, being able to come into school and they were clean and they had a school bag at the start of school and a pencil case and shoes and like a haircut. Those were the sort of first materialistic things were the sort of first things that I noticed that were different between me and my little brothers and sister and other kids that were in class. And that I would try and hide those things. So, I mean, I would try and wash the uniform, even though I never knew how to use a washing machine. I would try and find clean stuff to wear. I would try and wash myself and my little brothers and sister, even if we never had any hot water, so that I wasn't smelling. I would try and do my hair, even though I never had a clue what I was doing. I would just sort of slap it back with some whatever wax or stuff was lying about, because I wanted to be the same as everybody else. So the idea of shame came around the fact that I wasn't the same as everybody else, and I just wanted to be. I just wanted to fit in. Do you know what I mean? I just wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere with everybody else, and that's where the sense of shame sort of came into it. And showing that DVD but by the time I got to the stage that the DVD was going to be shown, it was definitely at a stage in my life where I knew that my life was completely different to a lot of people's, or at least I thought so. But some young people and some families were better at hiding it than others. And I wasn't so good at hiding it. I wasn't so good at hiding what was going on in my life. I would come in and I would look. By this point, I would look like I was coming from a sort of home where this sort of stuff was happening, where you would sort of be able to put the two things together. Whereas other young people, you would never think. So I mean, although they might have been going through that, I never had any idea they were going through it because nobody really talked about it. There was no sort of conversation about poverty or what was happening or what people's lives were like at home. So when they talked about showing this DVD, I knew that it would sort of blow a hole open in my big facade, which I didn't have because I was constantly acting all the time. I was constantly pretending that I was able to lie a lot at school quite confidently because I spent so much time doing it. I would come in and I'd say I was at my grand's for the Easter holidays. If people asked where I was at Easter, I was at my grand's at the Easter holidays and we went to the caravan with a dog called Ben. In reality, I was living in a rehabilitation centre with 6 addicts coming off of heroin. Do you know what I mean? That's not a story you want to be telling other young people at that stage because you know it's not the same as their lives. You know what I mean? You know that they probably won't understand it because we don't talk about it in school. It's not something that we talk about, so they won't understand it. They won't have empathy for it because I don't feel like it was taught much until you don't teach empathy much for your fellow students into the curriculum. I mean, there's something that we can do more. So that's where the shame comes in. Not being the same as everybody else. Not having that open sort of nature where you can talk about stuff in schools. I've been to some schools now. Do you know what I mean? Where if I had went to those schools now as a young person and had those same issues, I wouldn't have been as scared of. I wouldn't have been as scared of shame because the school was open enough and had that sort of dialogue with young people where it's no the young person's fault most of the time. So there is no shame about it because it's not my fault. But that was never sort of the case in my time in education or school. I think that the way that it's been combated now by some schools is brilliant, just having an open dialogue with the young people and the families, the parents. I mean, being able to bring them on board, how they're managing to do that now makes a big, massive difference. And just having that dialogue and having that open dialogue combats the shame, combats that feeling of shame for young people, because they won't have it if they don't feel like they're going to be shamed by anyone.
So the honesty, the openness, again,
Yes.
the conversation. What I'm seeing as well is people think the opposite of shame is pride. There's a place for pride, but pride was what you wanted was normality.
Yeah. For me, the opposite of shame is to belong.
Yeah. Belonging has come through time and time again, and it's so powerful. One of the things that came through in the working class book was this idea about my culture might not be your culture, but it's still a culture, and we need to, whatever any child brings to the classroom, we value that and value them as a result of it, and the value for what they bring, not what they discard. I think that's one of the lines from it, which brings me to social capital, and I'll come back to David on that, because there's so much in Chris's story to unpick from a social capital point of view. What's your take on social capital? And bearing in mind that certainly in England, it's now on Ofsted's radar that these are the sorts of things that I don't think they fully understand what it is. What's your take on that, David?
Yeah. I mean, I at the moment, it seems to me to be part of the same relatively elitist thinking that we have all the time. I mean, I think young people are not going to get anywhere unless there's some respect for their background and where they come from. And there's a sense that people, I suppose, like Boris Johnson and no doubt Dominic Cummings and Jacob Rees-Mogg and others are rich in social capital, but clearly that social and cultural capital doesn't extend to anything that resembles an understanding of what the lives of other people in this country are like. And whereas they may be well versed in the Aeneid or the Iliad or whatever, whether there's also an understanding of Shirley Hughes, the world that she creates in children's books and literature, whether there's an understanding of the world that Alan Warner writes about in Morven Calla, or any of these, there are real questions about that. And we had a really interesting discussion around this, and I'll try and be brief about it, because Phil Beadle, whom you will know and hopefully many people listening will know, is writing a book about exactly this. And he wanted to get a picture of what things were like in the 70s. And I put him in touch with a few other elderly people. We're not all in the same care home, but we're all surviving, remarkably. And we talked about that. And, one of the things that I was painfully aware of was that, for me, cultural capital, when I was teaching at that time, was about giving young people the opportunity to see the 784 company do the Chariot, the Stag and the Black Oil, to do the Games of Bogey, where they celebrated the work of John Maclean, Marxist economist, who lectured to hundreds, public lectures in Glasgow, that it was about giving them access to that as much as it was about giving them access to Shakespeare. And as a teacher, I took them to all of these things at the theatre. I took young people to all of these things, because what we need to do is what Howell Roberts talks about consistently and brilliantly in terms of the work that he did in Barnsley, that we use Kes to give them a sense of value and appreciation of their own background and culture, to albeit the sense of shame and encourage the sense of pride. But we also use To Kill a Mockingbird to challenge some of the issues and attitudes, and to do that in a way that makes them question. And I think, Ian, if there's one thing that you've significantly contributed over a long period of time, it's that idea about the question. That, what we need to do is to enable the questioning, to enable the critical thinking, to give people exposure to all sorts of experiences and culture. And I think that's something that's vitally important, that we have a curriculum which has regard for the background of those who are engaging in that curriculum, but which challenges, which opens up. And again, I quoted Chris earlier, at least I did it in the chat line, Chris's brilliant line about how was I supposed to find my way to the future? Nobody'd ever shown me a map. There's a desperate, and that's the cultural capital, is that awareness of the map, of the possibility of routes. McIlvanney, William McIlvanney, Scottish writer and the big man, talks about the purpose of education as being to take people to a high place where they can see further and more clearly. Not to a high place that's identified and designated as a haven in which they can be incarcerated, where they can be locked into an established set of ideas, but where they can question these ideas.
Doherty is one you recommended to me with regard to understanding, and it's an incredibly powerful, rich, lyrical book and an insight into sort of beginning of last century, going into the First World War and out of the First World War. It's incredibly powerful and just reinforce this idea of, we value the children for what they bring, not what they discard when they come into the classroom.
Yeah, I love that. I love that comment.
Yeah. We've got 3 minutes. I'll a quick one for you, David, and then I'll sort of give Chris the last word.
Okay.
Going back, and there's a question that's sort of there about transition and primary to secondary, bearing in mind how Chris described that transition in his life. He didn't realise his plate, there was so much on his plate to begin with until it filled up. Where, with children from the poor socioeconomic backgrounds, where might teachers start? What might be their starting point when children come back through the door, whenever that is?
Yeah, well, I think the starting point is always the same. Find out what they bring. Find out what the starting point is, and don't assume it. And if there was a practical message I was to give out of all of these discussions today, it would be that we need to move away from the obsession that we've got with pace, and particularly pace age-related, and move towards what I talk about now consistently as a culture of accelerated expectation. And what we see, I think, in some of the best and most successful schools is that they are not getting children to the level that might be specified or identified for them in reception or year one or primary one in Scotland or even primary two, but they are closing that gap as children move through the school. And the pressure is there to make sure that they accelerate to match pace at all stages, rather than to identify that culture of accelerated expectations, where we take children from where they are and we try and recognise the programme that they make supported by nurture. And I think the key point you make here, and sorry, I've gone on a wee bit long about this, the key point that you make around transition is absolutely vital. One of the things that's happened with Chris consistently is that just when I think he's there, just when I think he's out, they pull him back in. He's the Michael Corleone of social mobility, if I can actually go against my own commandments. And we need to recognise that it's not an escape, that Jazz still needs help, that Chris still needs help, that these people still need support. And we need to recognise that nurture is not something for children in early years. It's something for young people and older people to have when they need it. And your case around bereavement, I think, is absolutely wonderful as an example and illustration of that.
Right, okay, David, thank you. Chris, are you there? We've lost you on video. If you press a button, will you come back to us? Can you hear us? Can we open his mic? Okay, well, so if he comes back in, we will get him to say goodbye. I'm not sure what's happened, but not to worry. That is an hour. That hour's gone really quickly. Every time I hear Chris, and I know that the chat room is going to be full of people who are both angry and crying, because that tends to be the impact that he has. Because you just want to sort the things out so nobody else has to go through the things that he went out, and then we're emotionally touched because we see his honesty and his battle and his ongoing battle, and the way then that he was talking about his son and breaking that cycle of parental approaches, if you like, is incredibly powerful. So if you can hear me, Chris, thank you very much. I'll drop you an email anyway. I'll have another chat. David, always insightful, erudite, passionate, angry, but in a good way, not a ranty way, in a balanced way. And thank you for that. And I meant what I say. Independent thinking is better as a result of your constant provocations and your mind. So thank you for that. Thank you to all the people who attended. This will go out on video next week. Watch out on Twitter. I'll let you know about that. If you want to carry on the conversation at ITL Worldwide, we're there. Drop me an email, ian@independentthinking.co.uk. There was a question that came through which I'll bounce from a Mark Cooper, which I'll bounce directly to you, David, because we didn't really get time to sort of cover that, but that's okay. Any other questions, send them to me. Independentthinking.com, you can find out more about our work. Independentthinkingpress.com, all the Independent Thinking Press books are available, 30% off at the moment. Use the code CPD30. Including the Working Class book, which is a big book, but we're very proud of that book. And if you want it as an ebook, it's 50% off. Use the code VAT50, government and not VAT off ebooks. But you have to go to independentthinkingpress.com for that. If you go to Amazon, you don't get the discount and the country doesn't get the tax. And we need the tax. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, David. Thank you, Chris. And stay safe.